Hello, I'm Anne Varty. I'm Professor of Victorian Literature in the Department of English at Royal Holloway, University of London. I'm going to talk today about the dandy in relation to an ideal husband. And I'm going to begin by just considering where the dandy comes from in terms of, how does Wilde meet the dandy? The dandy at this time comes from France. It's a figure developed by Baudelaire, a writer that Wilde admired very much. And Baudelaire thinks of the dandy as being an outsider, an observer, somebody who moved through the crowd in the city, in a metropolis, observing it and seeking to understand contemporary urban life, modernity in its speed and haste, and being immersed in the moment of sensation within the crowd, but observing it, not being part of it. Wilde takes this figure further. The idea of being an observer and being not quite part of the society that's being observed is very important for Wilde, because the dandy becomes a means through which Wilde can comment on the social values, the social mores of the day, without being absorbed by them. The only play in which he really successfully maintains that detachment throughout the whole drama is, of course, The Importance of Being Earnest. But prior to that, he develops a number of dandies who use their poise, use their articulate wit, their epigram, in order to satirise and provoke, re-observe the society they're moving through. But all of them, at a certain point, become embroiled in the plot. They turn into the villain or the lover. They are married off. And as soon as they become embroiled in plot, they lose their outsider status and they can't any longer have that potency as a social commentator. So Goring is the dandy figure in Ideal Husband, and he manages to maintain that poise right to the end, because he's not married off until just seconds before the curtain goes down. So that's very important, that he does not get involved in the plot as an agent, but he continues his role as an observer right to the last. The dandy's one way in which Wilde could also challenge existing gender binaries and gender stereotypes. So just as he clearly enjoyed exploring new roles for women by examining the woman with a past, the fallen woman, the unmotherly mother, the Puritan woman, the number of different roles that men play in his drama is actually not so variegated. But the dandy is one very important role or stereotype which he brings in to question standard ideas of masculinity, usefulness, aggression. The dandy's a partner or a foil to the new woman. These are figures which emerge at a time when gender binaries are becoming destabilised and gender roles are becoming more fluid. So the dandy can be a feminised man, just as the new woman can be a masculinised woman. So each one takes on traits of the other. But the dandy is also a means of resisting utilitarianism, because the dandy does not have a useful role to play. They're not producing anything in the dramas. They are intellectual spirits. They're offering an idea of masculinity that does not depend on wealth, productivity, any kind of materialism, other than good taste. So the dandy is another way in which Wilde challenges the doctrines of his own era and the idea that wealth and materialism and productivity are the only ways to express masculinity and the only ways to be successful in society. The dandy for Wilde is also reaching a higher state of spiritual identity and spiritual being. So throughout Wilde's critical writings, Critic as Artist, The Soul of Man Under Socialism, The Decay of Lying, he was insistent on the idea that being was a higher state than doing. And the dandy is a figure who simply has to be, who simply has to exist, and of course who displays some sort of beautiful inner soul through a beautiful, fashionable exterior, but whose purpose is simply to exist. The dandy's interest in clothing and the dandy's interest in the way in which ideas can be clothed in witty language is part of the same enterprise to express a non-utilitarian function of language as well as a non-utilitarian function of being. The dandy, of course, does not have to be only male. Wilde presents us with a number of female dandies who are identified through their language, and the New Woman, of course, is a version of this, that her epigrammatic control of language is just as poised, as polished and as barbed as that of the male dandy. So Goring is our dandy in Ideal Husband. Much of what he preaches to Lady Chiltern is based on ideas which Wilde had explored in The Soul of Man Under Socialism, in which he had created the idea of the Christ figure as being an artist, an outsider and a dandy, somebody who rejected property, just as marriage is a conventional arrangement based on property exchange in which the woman is part of the property that's exchanged. So just as Soul of Man Under Socialism had rejected a property-based materialist society and used the figure of Christ to justify that, so too in An Ideal Husband, Goring is presented as a Christ figure, as an outsider, as somebody who preaches the doctrine of love as it is preached in the Gospels by Christ. So that's how he presents himself to Lady Chiltern, but that's because he knows that's how she's going to respond most positively. So he's very manipulative in the way he tries to really privilege and preserve his friend's career. So Robert Chiltern, he's much more of a moral pragmatist. Crimes have taken place, but he's also willing to forgive that. So the idea is that knowledge is not just power, but it's also a means to forgiveness, is something that he brings into action there. So he's not a very conventional dandy, insofar as he doesn't always speak in epigram, and he can be aligned with a particular religious philosophy much more readily than any of Wilde's other dandies can be.